I had been floating all day on the quiet thrill of finalizing another wedding detail, checking off boxes, imagining the moment I would finally walk down the aisle toward James. My fiancé, my partner, my anchor. That fragile piece shattered the instant I opened my bedroom door. I froze. My breath snagged halfway up my throat. There, in the golden spill of afternoon light, stood Giselle. Her slender frame shimmered in ivory satin, a dress that cascaded over her shoulders and hugged her waist as though it had been designed for her. Except it wasn't hers. It was mine. My after-party wedding dress, the one I had hunted for across boutiques and designers, the one I knew James adored from the moment I showed him the sketch. And it didn't stop there. Dangling from her ears were my grandmother's diamond earrings, delicate drops of light heirlooms promised to me since childhood tucked away for my wedding day. The sight of them on Giselle's smug, satisfied face ignited something molten inside me. "What are you doing with my wedding dress?" My voice cracked out like glass under strain, low but sharp. She turned startled for the briefest second. Then, as if the whole scene were some twisted comedy, her lips curved into a radiant smile. "Helena." Perfect timing. She swished the satin skirt, admiring her reflection in my mirror. "Don't you think it looks better on me?" Mom agrees. Her words hit me harder than a slap. Before I could respond, the faint groan of a floorboard betrayed them. My parents hovered in the doorway, their faces stiff, their eyes flinty with a mixture of guilt and stubborn resolve. They had known. They had planned this. Honey, Mom said in that sing-song voice she always used when trying to manage me as if I were a volatile client rather than her daughter. "You'll have your main wedding gown. Can't you share this one just this once?" Dad waved a dismissive hand, already siding with the spectacle before him. "Your sister has always looked stunning in white." My pulse thudded in my ears. Their words pulled me backward through time, unlocking a flood of moments I had tried to bury. Giselle scuffing my designer shoes on her way to a date, returning them with an airy, "oops, sorry." My vintage purse smeared with rouge and eyeliner. My carefully chosen cashmere sweater stretched out of shape because she wanted to borrow something cozy. Family comes first, they'd always told me. And every time I swallowed my objections, played the responsible daughter, told myself peace mattered more than possessions. But this wasn't a sweater. This was my wedding. My throat constricted as another memory surfaced last winter when Giselle borrowed a client's custom ensemble I had prepared for Senator Graham's daughter. She spilled red wine on the jacket, staining my career in one careless moment. My boss's cold eyes had cut me sharper than any blade. Strike one, he had warned. And when I turned to my parents, they had shrugged. "Accidents happen. She's your sister." Not this time. Something inside me realigned. My shoulders straightened, my breath deepened, and when I spoke, my voice was no longer shaky, it was steel. "Take it off." The silence that followed was heavy, pressing against the walls. Giselle's smirk faltered, her mouth parting in disbelief. "You can't be serious." She laughed, but it cracked brittle. "Mom, tell her she's being ridiculous." Mom stepped forward, palms lifted as if to soothe an animal. "Helena, sweetie, don't make this dramatic. Giselle just wants to feel special too." "Take it off," I repeated lower, firmer. My gaze never left Giselle's. "Now, or I call off the wedding." The threat rang between us, sharp as shattered glass. Dad's jaw tightened, his face flushing crimson. He opened his mouth to bark a rebuke, but something in my expression stopped him. Maybe for the first time they saw that I wasn't bluffing. "Fine," Giselle hissed. Her voice dripped venom. "I didn't want your stupid dress anyway." She yanked at the zipper with deliberately rough fingers, as though to punish the fabric for being mine. I lunged forward, catching her wrist before she could damage it. "The earrings, too," I said softly. Her glare burned into me as she unhooked them and dropped them into my palm with a vicious snap. The diamonds bit into my skin, cold and sharp. Then, with a theatrical roll of her eyes, she stormed from the room, the sound of her heels like gunshots across the hallway. My parents lingered, their eyes slicing into me with unspoken promises of consequences. Without a word, they turned and left the weight of their disapproval clinging to the air. Alone, I hung the dress carefully back in my closet. My fingers trembled as they smoothed the satin, but beneath the trembling was something new, something solid. For 27 years, I had been the peacekeeper, the daughter who yielded, the one who understood, always stepping aside, always accommodating. But looking at the dress now glowing in the sliver of fading sunlight, I made myself a vow. Not anymore. They had taken enough. This wedding would be mine. And God help anyone, sister, mother, or father, who tried to steal another piece of me. That night, after Giselle's tantrum had rattled down the staircase and my parents' cold stares had burned through me like acid, I sat in the quiet of my room with only the dress for company. The satin gleamed faintly under the lamplight, its folds whispering promises I was no longer sure I could keep. My grandmother's earrings rested in their velvet box on my dresser, the diamonds catching light even in near darkness, cold, unyielding, resilient. I ran my fingers across the fabric, not to admire it, but to remind myself it was still here, still mine. My chest ached with the echo of my parents' words, that familiar refrain. Family comes first. Only in this family had always meant Giselle. Every time she stole something, they wrapped her theft in ribbons of excuses. She's fragile. She needs it more. Be the bigger person, Helena. And I had. God, I had. For 27 years, I swallowed every slight bit back. Every protest convinced myself that peace mattered more than fairness, that yielding made me good, that sacrifice was love. But today, something snapped. I stood before the mirror where Giselle had posed hours earlier. My reflection didn't look like me, or perhaps it looked like a version of me I had buried. My chin was higher, my eyes sharper, my mouth set with quiet defiance. The Helena who gave in so easily had died on that carpet when I said, "Take it off." What lived now was someone else. I wasn't sure if I liked her yet, but I knew I needed her. The house creaked with night sounds, my father's heavy footsteps, my mother's low voice drifting from their room, Giselle slamming a door in melodramatic fury. The same house I grew up in, filled with the same sounds, suddenly felt hostile, like enemy territory. I'd always thought of myself as an outsider in my own family. Tonight, I knew it was true. A sharp knock rattled my door. Helena Mom's voice muffled, but cutting seeped through the wood. "Can we talk?" I didn't move. I sat on the bed, still in my dress from work, arms wrapped around my stomach like a shield. "Sweetheart," she continued, her tone dripping with that feigned concern I had learned to decode years ago. "You overreacted. Giselle was just excited. It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal." The words lit a fire in me. My career almost destroyed by her borrowing. My possessions ruined. My dignity chipped away piece by piece. And now, my wedding dress, not a big deal. I said nothing. Her footsteps retreated after a pause, and the hallway fell silent. I exhaled shakily, pulling my knees to my chest. The silence wasn't comfort, it was calculation. I knew them. This wasn't over. My parents weren't retreating. They were regrouping, which meant I had to do the same. For the first time in my life, I began to think strategically. What was mine? What could they take? Where were the cracks they'd slip through? I thought of James, of our tiny apartment across town. He didn't fully understand my family's poison, not yet, but he would. He had to, because if I didn't tell him soon, my parents would. And they'd spin the story like they always did Helena, the selfish Giselle, the victim. The weight of choice pressed against me. I could cave like always and give Giselle her scraps of my joy. Or I could hold the line and risk losing my parents' approval, their financial backing, their version of family. My stomach churned. Fear curled in my chest. But beneath it pulsed something harder, brighter. Resolve. I whispered it to myself in the dark, like a prayer, like a curse, like a spell. Not this time. I didn't yet know what battle was coming. I didn't yet know the lengths they'd go to break me. But I knew I was done being broken. The seed had been planted, and though it trembled under the weight of doubt, I could already feel its roots digging deep. 3 weeks before the wedding, James and I finally breathed a sigh of relief. We had settled on the cake flavor, a compromise between my love for lavender and his obsession with buttercream. It felt symbolic somehow, two different tastes blending into something sweeter together. James, ever the steady one, squeezed my hand and whispered, "Just 3 more weeks, Helena. 3 more weeks until you're mine." I leaned into him, craving the simplicity of that truth. 3 weeks. a lifetime condensed into a number that felt small enough to hold in my palm. The doorbell rang. Neither of us moved at first. We weren't expecting anyone. No deliveries, no friends dropping by. James raised an eyebrow and I shrugged. With a low groan, he set his notebook aside and padded toward the door. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's brisk voice firing off questions about our sofa as if the fabric choice betrayed some secret about my competence as a wife. My father's baritone laced with quiet disapproval, already calculating how much we must have paid for the apartment. They hadn't called. They never did. They just appeared like specters summoned by my engagement. We brought the family wedding planner Mom announced as she swept into the living room, clutching a leather-bound binder I'd never seen. Its glossy cover caught the light casting a shadow over the notes James and I had so carefully compiled. Dad followed eyes darting around cataloging, tallying, judging. I stiffened. James settled back on the sofa, his hand finding mine again, our silent code for don't panic. Just small tweaks to make everything perfect, Mom said, laying the binder on the coffee table as if she were delivering a holy text. James leaned forward, polite but wary. We've already decided most of the details. Helena's been very thorough. Mom waved her hand like brushing away cobwebs. Of course, but there's always room for improvement. Look. She flipped to a page marked Bridal Party. My eyes narrowed. A name written in bold ink had been added beneath mine. Giselle. Beside it, a note co-bride, matching gown, coordinating jewelry. My blood iced over. The room tilted, then snapped back into focus so violently it made my stomach lurch. Co-bride James said flatly, his hand tightening on mine. There's no such thing. This is our wedding. Mom chuckled, the sound brittle as glass. It's a new trend, very European. It's not a trend, I said, my voice low measured, and it's not happening. Dad cleared his throat, his expression hard. Helena, be reasonable. Your sister has been looking forward to this. I stared at him, disbelief cracking through me. Looking forward to what, my wedding? To sharing this special day, Mom corrected her smile, tight corners sharp enough to cut. James's jaw flexed. His other hand came to rest against my back, steadying me. It's our day, no one else's. But my parents weren't listening. They never did. Mom flipped through more pages, showing us revised seating charts, vendor adjustments, even a second bridal suite penciled in for Giselle, all without my consent. All orchestrated behind my back. My vision blurred with rage. This wasn't a conversation. It was an ambush. When they finally left, trailing promises to discuss further, I sat frozen on the couch, staring at the closed door as if it might breathe fire and swallow me whole. James turned his face pale with fury. They're trying to rewrite your wedding. No, I whispered, pressing trembling hands against my knees. They're trying to erase me from it. The seed of rebellion I'd planted that night after the dress theft cracked open in my chest, sprouting something sharp, something unyielding. This wasn't just about Giselle anymore. This was war. The morning after the ambush, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been left behind. Something hidden beneath the glossy binder Mom so triumphantly slapped onto our coffee table. When James left for work, I sat down at my laptop, fingers hovering above the keyboard, heart pounding like I was about to commit a crime. I typed a single word into my email search bar: wedding. Dozens of messages spilled onto the screen, more than I remembered, more than I had ever been copied on. My breath caught. Thread after thread appeared between my mother and the venue coordinator. My name was absent from nearly all of them. I clicked. Highlight both sisters equally. Balanced photo opportunities, special instructions for 2 bridal suites. My stomach turned. The words blurred as I scrolled faster, my pulse roaring in my ears. It wasn't just meddling. It was conspiracy. They had been planning this all along, carving pieces of my wedding away without me ever knowing. James, the Y whispered, my throat dry. My shaking hand dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. You need to see this. When he got home that evening, we sat shoulder to shoulder at the desk, scrolling in silence. His hand gripped mine so tightly my knuckles turned white. Finally, he leaned back, exhaling through clenched teeth. They're trying to make her the bride. Not just involved. The bride. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A new Instagram notification. Giselle had tagged me. With a hollow pit growing in my chest, I opened the app. There she was, standing in my after-party dress. The same dress she had been forced to peel off just days ago. Only now it had been altered, hem-adjusted waist, nipped and neckline lowered. She posed as though the camera loved her head, tilted hair tumbling down her shoulders. The caption final fitting for my wedding look, sister ceremony, double the brides. Comments flooded in beneath the picture. Wait, you're engaged too. What's a sister ceremony? So cool. Double brides, double fun? My stomach twisted into knots. A sour taste filled my mouth. The phone rang again. Aunt Catherine from Virginia, her voice laced with confusion. Helena, honey, your mom just told me about this unusual sister ceremony. Is this really something you want? I stammered, trying to explain that none of it was my idea. But she only made a non-committal noise before murmuring, well, family should stick together, and hanging up. The calls kept coming. Cousin Samantha, Uncle Robert, family friends from states away, all of them asking the same question. Why are you making your sister a co-bride? Each word pressed like a stone on my chest, stacking higher, heavier. By evening, my phone felt like a brick in my hand. Every call, every message chipped away at me until I wanted to scream, until I wanted to fling it across the room. I finally answered when Mom called because some part of me needed to hear it straight from her lips. Helena, she said, voice dripping with feigned exhaustion. You've always been the strong one. Giselle has been so depressed since her breakup. She needs this. Dad's voice cut in from the background, clipped and decisive. We're paying for half this wedding. We have a say. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone until my nails dug into my palm. This wasn't just manipulation. This was theft in slow motion, one careful slice at a time. And worst of all, they weren't hiding it anymore. The following afternoon, as I sat slumped over a cold cup of tea, the doorbell rang. For once, it wasn't my parents barging in. It was Aunt Martha, my father's older sister, the one family member who had always kept a quiet distance from the rest of the clan. Her visits were rare. She lived out of state and only appeared for funerals, milestone birthdays, or the occasional holiday when guilt outweighed her dislike of family drama. Seeing her standing at my door, clutching a canvas tote bag, was like watching a ghost materialize. Martha, I blinked, surprised. Can I come in? She asked, her eyes flicking nervously down the hall, as though she feared someone had followed her. James ushered her inside, and she sat at our kitchen table, smoothing the fabric of her skirt with shaking hands. After a long pause, she said quietly, I should have told you sooner. My chest tightened. Told me what? She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Your mother ordered Giselle's dress the same week you ordered yours. I overheard them at Christmas. They were laughing about it, said it would be easier to ask forgiveness than permission. My stomach flipped, bile rising in my throat. You mean, this was planned from the very beginning? Martha nodded, shame softening her features. I thought it was just talk your mother's usual scheming. But then I saw the invoices, the fittings, Giselle bragging behind your back. Helena, they've been setting you up for months. I gripped the edge of the table, grounding myself against the sickening tilt of the room. James swore under his breath, pacing like a caged animal. Why didn't you say anything? I whispered. Her eyes glistened. Because I didn't think they'd go through with it. Because I thought maybe your mom would come to her senses. Because... She broke off, shaking her head. Because I was a coward, and now look at the mess. I sat back, the betrayal slicing deeper than I expected. Not just my parents. Not just Giselle. Silence had made conspirators out of everyone. That night, when the weight of Martha's words grew unbearable, I drove to the one person who had never failed me, Grandma Rose. Her assisted living apartment smelled faintly of cinnamon and chamomile, warm and safe in ways my childhood home never was. She sat in her floral armchair, a knit shawl draped over her thin shoulders, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. Helena, my darling. Her fingers, arthritic but strong, wrapped around mine as I sank to my knees beside her chair. They're trying to take my wedding, I choked out. The dam broke words, spilling faster than I could contain them. They want Giselle as a co-bride. They've already planned everything. My throat closed. Tears blurred my vision. I don't know what to do. Grandma Rose cupped my cheek, her skin papery but her touch fierce. Listen to me. This is your day. Yours. Not your sister's. Not your mother's. Yours. Her voice, though frail, rang like a church bell in my bones. No one has the right to steal this from you, Helena. Not even family, especially not family. For the first time in weeks, the panic inside me stilled. Her words were an anchor dragging me back from the storm. I pressed my forehead against her knee, breathing in the faint scent of lavender that clung to her clothes. I don't know if I'm strong enough. She squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. You've always been the strong one. You just don't believe it yet. I swallowed, pulling in shaky breaths. When I left her that night, the air outside felt sharper, clearer. For 27 years, I had been conditioned to yield. But as Grandma's words echoed in my chest, I realized yielding wasn't survival. It was erasure. And I was done disappearing. The next evening, James and I returned from a quiet dinner downtown, hoping for a moment of calm. Instead, I found my phone buzzing nonstop on the counter, 30 unread messages stacked like bricks, threatening to crush me. All from the same 3 people, Mom, Dad, and Giselle. I unlocked the screen with a sinking feeling. The first message from Mom was deceptively gentle, sweetheart, we've made a final decision. It's time to stop fighting us on this. The next from Dad came like a hammer. Either include Giselle as co-bride, or we withdraw all financial support. The venue, the catering, the photography, all of it. Paid half by us. Don't test us. And finally, Giselle's contribution, written with the smug flourish of someone who thought she had already won. Don't ruin this for me, Helena. We both know I'd make the prettier bride. Followed by a winking emoji. My stomach twisted so violently I had to sit down. The words blurred together, a blur of threats and demands. James stood over my shoulder reading. His jaw tightened until I thought it might crack. They can't do this, he muttered. They can't just... They can, I said hoarsely, and they will. Because this wasn't about fairness. It never had been. This was about power, and they knew exactly where to press. Money, reputation, leverage. They always did. Before I could spiral further, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Diana, my boss. I considered ignoring it, but guilt made me swipe to answer. Helena Diana said, her voice sharp, but not unkind. I'm going to be blunt. One of our clients asked me today about your double wedding. They saw the segment with Giselle on TV. My pulse spiked. She went on television. Yes, Diana replied crisply, crying about how her sister wouldn't let her share the special day. Now, people are asking questions, and it's bleeding into the studio. Our brand thrives on perfection, not family soap operas. Heat surged into my cheeks. I could picture it all too clearly, Giselle dabbing her eyes with tissues, painting herself as the victim while I sat here, being cast as the villain in a story I never agreed to. I'll handle it, I whispered. You'd better, Diana said. Then softer. Don't let her cost you your career the way she almost did last year. You know what's at stake. The call ended, leaving silence heavy in the room. James crouched in front of me, his hands gripping mine. This isn't just about a dress anymore, Helena. I shook my head, tears threatening. It's about my entire life. And he was right. This wasn't just a wedding. This was every sacrifice I'd ever made, every time I'd been told to step aside, every inch of myself I'd given away in the name of family. They were trying to steal the one day meant for me, and if I let them, it would never stop. I looked at James, at the steadiness in his eyes. If I cave to them, they'll own me forever. He nodded slowly. So don't cave. The ultimatum had been delivered, but so had the answer. For the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't just fighting for a wedding. I was fighting for myself. 2 days after the ultimatum, I drove back to Grandma Rose's apartment, my chest tight, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I needed her calm, her clarity. The storm at home was tearing me apart. She was waiting for me in her armchair, the TV murmuring softly in the background, her knitting needles resting idly in her lap. The moment she saw my face, she clicked the TV off and patted the chair beside her. Tell me, she said simply. So I did. The threats, the text messages, Giselle's smug TV performance, the way the walls of my life felt like they were closing in. By the time I finished, my voice was raw, my throat aching. Grandma sat in silence, eyes thoughtful, hands folded. Finally, she sighed. I suppose it's time you know the truth. A chill prickled down my arms. What truth? She shifted her shawl, sliding off one shoulder. Your mother did the same thing to her sister, my Louise. I blinked. What? At Louise's wedding, your mother wore white, insisted on standing beside her for photos, demanded the same flowers, the same bouquet. When Louise objected, your grandfather sided with your mother. That day broke them. They haven't spoken in 30 years. The words slammed into me, rearranging the map of my world. I sat back, shaking my head. So this insanity, it isn't new. Grandma's lips pressed into a thin line. No, it's a pattern. The women in our family are taught to yield, to swallow their anger, to let others take what's theirs. Her eyes, sharp and clear despite her age, locked on mine. And when they do fight, they're painted as selfish, dramatic, villains in their own stories. My throat closed. It was as if she had peeled back the curtain of my entire life. Every time I'd been told to be the bigger person. Every time I'd been shamed for wanting what was mine. It wasn't weakness, it was inheritance. I can't let this happen, I whispered. I can't be another Louise. You won't, she said firmly. Then, with a surprising strength, she pushed herself up and shuffled toward her bedroom. Come. I followed her down the narrow hallway to a cedar chest at the foot of her bed. The wood was scratched, its brass hinges dulled with age. She bent, opened it with a creak, and pulled out a folder thick with documents. These are for you. I took them, my hands trembling. The first was a deed. My name was printed beside hers. I'm co-owner of your house. Since your 25th birthday, she said matter-of-factly. The next document was a trust. My name appeared again, this time as executor and primary beneficiary of her estate. I looked up, stunned. Why didn't you tell me? Her eyes softened. Because I wanted you to discover your strength first. I've been watching your parents let Giselle strip you bare for years. I couldn't stop them, but I could make sure they couldn't take everything. This, she tapped the papers, is protection. Leverage. Power. The weight of it sank into me, heavy but strangely liberating. For so long I'd believed I had no ground to stand on, no leverage, just my voice against their chorus. But here it was proof that I wasn't powerless, that I had been underestimated even by them. You've been protecting me all this time, I murmured. Her wrinkled hand closed around mine. Now you can protect yourself. Something shifted inside me, then a tectonic realignment. For 27 years I had been trained to bow my head, but sitting there with the documents in my lap, I realized I didn't have to anymore. I wasn't the helpless daughter, I wasn't the peacekeeper, I wasn't the victim, I was the heir. And for the first time, I intended to fight like it. The drive back from Grandma Rose's felt different, like the same city streets had transformed beneath my tires. Buildings loomed taller, sharper, as though daring me to falter. But I didn't. For the first time in my life, I felt something hardening in my chest, not fear, not resentment, but resolve. When I walked into our apartment, James immediately noticed the folder clutched against my chest. What's that? Proof, I said simply. My voice didn't shake. Proof that they don't control everything. I laid the papers out on the kitchen table, the deed, the trust my name in black ink where they had always assumed it didn't belong. James leaned over, his eyes widening. Then slowly he smiled, a sharp, proud smile I'd never seen on him before. They don't own you, he murmured. They never did. I shook my head. No, but I let them make me believe they did. That night, while the city hummed outside our window, we began dismantling their control. James, ever meticulous, opened his laptop and began running numbers. If they pull their funding can, we cover it. Yes, I said, surprising even myself with the certainty in my voice. We'll cut corners. I'll dip into savings. We'll make it work. I'd rather eat takeout for a year than let them buy Giselle into my wedding. We drafted transfer requests, rerouted deposits, and within 24 hours, every vendor was paid directly from our account. Their financial leverage evaporated like mist in the sun. Sarah, my maid of honor, arrived the next morning with a yellow legal pad tucked under her arm. She dropped it on the coffee table like a weapon. I'm documenting everything she announced. Every boundary violation, every manipulation, every threat. If they escalate, we'll have a record. They want to play games. Fine, we'll play smarter. She had already listed dates, times, screenshots of texts. Seeing it written down black and white, stripped of excuses, was like staring at an indictment. Through a coworker, I found Tasha a wedding planner not entangled in my mother's social circle. When I met her at her downtown office, I felt like I'd stepped into another world. Her walls were lined with photos of celebrations that pulsed with individuality, no cookie-cutter gowns, no co-brides forced into the spotlight. "Tell me what you want," Tasha said, emphasizing the word like it mattered, because to her, it did. "Security," I answered immediately. "I need people who will enforce the guest list, people who won't hesitate if certain family members try to disrupt things." She didn't blink. "Consider it done." That evening, Marcus James's old college roommate turned IT security consultant sat at our dining table with his laptop open, typing faster than I could follow. "Your mother's been slipping into your vendor accounts through weak passwords," he explained. "Not anymore." In under an hour, every account tied to the wedding venue photographer-caterer was secured with new credentials and two-factor authentication. "Now only you or James can make changes," Marcus said. "No exceptions." I called the venue directly bypassing the coordinator my mother had befriended. "I'm the bride," I told the manager, my voice steady. "The only bride. Any changes must come from me or my fiancé. If anyone else tries, ignore them." "Understood, Ms. Carter," the manager replied. "We'll update our files immediately." That night, as I collapsed into bed, the knot in my stomach loosened for the first time in weeks. They could no longer touch the money. They could no longer tamper with the vendors. Their grip on my wedding on me was slipping. James wrapped an arm around me, his breath warm against my hair. "You look different," he whispered. "I feel different," I admitted. "For once, I'm not waiting for their next move. I'm making mine." And as I drifted into sleep, I realized this wasn't just a defense. It was the beginning of an attack. The following weekend, I staged the moment with precision. Giselle had always been a creature of vanity, obsessed with mirrors, with lenses, with any surface that might reflect her back at herself. So when I invited her over under the guise of trying on the after-party dress one more time for proper measurements, she didn't hesitate. She arrived with a smug smile and a fresh blowout strutting into my bedroom as though it already belonged to her. Mom followed close behind, beaming triumphant, ready to supervise what she thought was my surrender. "See, I knew you'd come around," she said, squeezing my arm. "This will be a memory the whole family will cherish." I bit down hard on my tongue to keep from laughing. "Oh, it'll be a memory all right." I zipped Giselle into the ivory satin, adjusting the fabric carefully so she couldn't accuse me later of sabotage. She twirled in front of the mirror, her movements dramatic, practiced like she was already picturing the photo spreads. Mom clapped her hands together, eyes glistening. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect." I smiled, faintly raised my phone and snapped photo after photo. The altered dress, the heirloom earrings dangling from her ears, her triumphant grin, her pose dripping with entitlement. When I had enough, I slipped into the hallway. My thumbs flew across the screen, building a gallery that told a story not even my parents could rewrite. First photo, my designer shoes, once pristine, returned scuffed and ruined. Next, my vintage purse smeared with makeup stains that never came out. Then my cashmere sweater stretched and warped from her borrowing. Finally, Giselle beaming in my after-party dress, my earrings posing as if she were the bride. The caption, "A bride deserves respect. Some things aren't meant to be borrowed." Bride not bullied. I hit post at exactly 8 a.m. the next morning, timed perfectly for when Dad opened his work emails and Mom sipped her first coffee while scrolling through her phone. By noon, the post had exploded. Friends, colleagues, even strangers rallied to my defense. The hashtag trended locally by afternoon, climbing into national feeds by evening. Brides from across the country posted their own stories of overbearing families, of stolen gowns, of sabotaged ceremonies. My inbox filled with messages. "You're so brave for standing up for yourself. Don't let them take your day." By lunch, 3 of our wedding vendors had publicly commented on the post, vowing they would only take instructions from the actual bride, Helena Carter. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls from my parents, then Giselle. 17 calls from Mom, 14 from Dad, 11 from Giselle, all ignored. At work, I slipped my phone into my desk drawer, silencing the chaos. When my boss Diana passed by and saw the post trending on my computer screen, she didn't scold me. She only glanced at the images, then at me, and said simply, "About time." By evening, it was clear the narrative had shifted. I wasn't the selfish daughter anymore. I wasn't the villain in their story. I was the bride who fought back. The morning of my wedding dawned cool and bright, the sky scrubbed clean by a night of rain. I arrived at the venue 3 hours early, my gown packed carefully in the garment bag, my grandmother's earrings tucked into their velvet case. James walked beside me, our hands linked, both of us silent but steady. Today wasn't just a ceremony, it was a battlefield. Through the glass doors, chaos unfolded. My parents were already there, flanking the venue coordinator like generals in a coup. Mom waved her arms dramatically, her voice shrill with indignation. Dad, red-faced, brandished a stack of papers that looked suspiciously like our contract. And behind them, my heart skipped. Then hardened stood Giselle, draped in a gown almost identical to mine. A ghostly copy, a parasite. We had an understanding, Mom insisted, her voice carrying through the foyer. It's a family tradition, both daughters honored equally. The coordinator looked helpless, caught between authority and intimidation. Ma'am, there's nothing in our contract about. It was a verbal agreement, Dad thundered. If you refuse, we'll pursue legal action for breach of contract. James's grip on my hand tightened. I felt his pulse fast and furious against my palm. Behind us, Marcus and the rest of our small but formidable security team college friends in sharp suits, expressions like stone, stood ready. They weren't here to fight. They were here to shield, to hold the line. You ready? James asked quietly. I nodded, more than ever. The moment we stepped inside, the air shifted. Mom's face drained of color. Dad's words stuttered into silence, and Giselle's mouth formed a perfect O of shock. They hadn't expected me this early. They'd thought they had another hour to twist the narrative, to bend the day toward their will. Miss Carter, the coordinator, said, relief flooding her expression. Perhaps you can clarify this situation. I let my voice ring loud enough for everyone, staff, decorators, even the florist setting vases nearby, to hear. There is no sister ceremony. There is one bride. Me. Anyone saying otherwise is confused. Gasps rippled through the small crowd of workers. Mom flushed scarlet, sputtering. Dad tried to step forward, but Marcus blocked him with the subtle, immovable presence of a linebacker turned professional. They are guests, I continued, staring directly at the coordinator. They are not authorized to make changes to the ceremony or reception. If they attempt to, I want them escorted to the designated family area. Immediately. For a beat, no one moved. Then slowly, the coordinator nodded. Understood, Miss Carter. Dad's face contorted with fury. You can't. I cut in my tone, sharp as broken glass. And I am. Silence swallowed the room. Even Giselle, in her knockoff gown, faltered. James squeezed my hand once more, pride shining in his eyes. You're incredible, he whispered. 2 hours later, in the bridal suite, Grandma Rose adjusted the pearl pin in my veil with trembling fingers. You look magnificent, she whispered, her eyes misting. Strong. Fierce. Sarah poked her head in, grinning. Your parents are sitting in the front row, looking like they swallowed lemons. And Giselle, get this, is trying to make her dress look more bridal by stealing flowers from the centerpieces. Laughter bubbled from my chest, light and unshakable. The fear was gone. In its place was a calm, powerful certainty. The music swelled. I took Grandma's arm. Not my father's, not the man who had spent his life choosing Giselle over me, but the woman who had shown me what true support meant. Together, we stepped into the aisle. As we entered the hall, the celebrant's voice rang clear, deliberate. Today we gather to witness the union of Helena Carter and James Wells. Only. She emphasized the last word like a dagger. A ripple of discomfort spread through the crowd. Mom's smile twitched brittle. Dad glared straight ahead. Giselle fidgeted, tugging at her too white dress. But I didn't look at them. I looked at James. His smile became my anchor, his eyes my horizon. And with each step I left behind, every stolen sweater, every ruined purse, every scuffed shoe, every moment I'd been told to yield. This was my wedding, my day. And for the first time in my life, no one could take it from me. The ceremony had been perfect, simple, radiant mine. When James and I kissed, the applause felt like thunder shaking the walls, a sound that washed away every doubt, every humiliation my family had tried to brand onto me. But I knew the war wasn't finished. It never was with them. By the time the reception began, I could feel the tension humming beneath the surface like a live wire. The chandeliers bathed the hall in soft golden light, the tables glittered with candles, and laughter bubbled all around. But at the family table, 3 faces were locked in tight, furious masks. Mom's smile was frozen in place, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. Dad sat stiffly, jaw-clenched so hard I half expected his teeth to crack. And Giselle, oh, Giselle, pouted in her stolen white gown, tugging at it like it might transform into something more bridal if she willed it hard enough. When I emerged from the bridal suite in my after-party dress, the one she'd once dared to claim conversations hushed. Grandma's diamond earrings sparkled under the chandelier, scattering light across the floor. My guests gasped, admiring. My friends cheered. But the look on my family's faces, it was the sweetest applause of all. Rage, resentment, powerlessness. Sarah lifted her glass. To Helena and James, she shouted her grin broad and triumphant. To chosen family, I added, raising my own glass high. My eyes sought out Grandma, then Sarah, then James. Deliberately, carefully, I avoided the family table. The omission hung heavy, unmistakable. The guests caught on instantly, murmuring their approval, clinking glasses. But of course my parents weren't about to let the night slip away so easily. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Giselle sidling toward the DJ booth, Mom hot on her heels. I drifted closer, ears straining. Special Sister Toast Mom hissed to the wedding planner, her tone sharp enough to slice glass. "It's traditional." The planner shook her head firmly. "Not on the schedule." Giselle's hand darted for the microphone, desperation etched across her face. But before she could touch it, James's best man intercepted his frame, blocking her path. "The bride's playlist is very specific," he said pleasantly, his smile disarming but his stance immovable. "Can't deviate." Giselle flushed crimson, sputtering. I crossed to the dance floor and stopped directly in front of her. For the first time all night, I looked her dead in the eyes. "Not today," I said quietly, the steel in my voice unmistakable. "Not ever again." Her eyes widened. She searched my face for hesitation, for softness, for the Helena she had always known would bend. She didn't find her. For the first time in her life, Giselle looked afraid. She retreated, her steps faltering, and the music swelled once more, carrying me back into the sea of my guests. The battle was won, but I could feel the final confrontation simmering, waiting. I knew my parents wouldn't let the night end without one last attempt at control. And I was ready. I had barely stepped away from the dance floor when I felt it, the heat of my father's stare burning into my back. Moments later, his hand clamped down on my arm, firm enough to bruise. "We need to talk," he hissed, his voice tight with fury. "Now!" I followed, not out of obedience, but because I wanted this. I wanted the fight. He led me to a side room off the reception hall, a small lounge where the muffled beat of music pulsed faintly through the walls. Mom was already inside, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that held not a single tear. Giselle, slumped in the corner, arms crossed her knockoff gown, wrinkling under the weight of her sulk. "You've humiliated us," Dad snapped the moment the door closed. His face was flushed. His voice a dangerous whisper. "In front of everyone we know. In front of our church, our community. Do you realize the damage you've done?" I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "The damage I've done? You tried to hijack my wedding. You paraded Giselle around as if she were the bride, and I'm the one humiliating you." Mom jumped in, her voice dripping with martyrdom. "We only wanted both our daughters to shine. After everything we've sacrificed for you, after all we've given, this is how you repay us. By embarrassing us." Her performance was flawless, the same one she had used for decades to guilt me into silence. But tonight, the spell was broken. "Sacrifice," I repeated, my voice low, trembling, not with fear, but with fury. "You call enabling Giselle's every theft a sacrifice. You call tearing down your eldest daughter so your youngest can cosplay as her a sacrifice." Mom gasped, her tissue fluttering to the floor. Dad's face darkened. "Enough. You're going to regret this little public display." Something inside me clicked, then like a lock sliding open. I straightened my shoulders, letting the weight of Grandma's earrings steady me. "Thank you," I said softly. They both froze, confusion flickering across their faces. For what? Mom whispered cautiously. For finally showing me who you are. I let the words hang cold and sharp. For 27 years, I thought if I just gave a little more, if I just bent a little further, I'd earn your love. But tonight, I see the truth. You don't want love. You want control. And I'm done giving it to you. Dad stepped forward, his eyes blazing. If you walk out that door, you'll what I cut him off, my voice steady as stone. Take my car, my inheritance, my wedding dress. You've been stripping pieces of me my entire life. There's nothing left for you to claim. The silence was deafening. Even Giselle, usually quick with a cutting remark, sat gaping at me like she didn't recognize the sister standing before her. I moved toward the door, pausing with my hand on the knob. Enjoy the cake, I added, turning just enough to catch their stunned faces. I chose chocolate because it's the only flavor Giselle hates. And then I left them there, 3 people trapped in their own outrage, powerless for the first time. Back in the reception hall, laughter and music embraced me like a second skin. James found me, his arms sliding around my waist as if I'd been gone for years instead of minutes. They tried, didn't they? He murmured against my ear. Yes, I said, resting my head against his shoulder. And they failed. The relief was intoxicating, almost dizzying. For the first time in my life, I had looked them in the eye and said no. And the world hadn't collapsed. It had opened. 6 months later, I stood barefoot in the bay window of our new home, a Victorian with peeling paint and creaky floorboards in a quiet Connecticut town. Outside, the lawn was carpeted with amber leaves swirling in the crisp autumn wind. I sipped my coffee, slowly savoring the stillness. No footsteps pounding down a hallway, no doors slamming in manufactured outrage, no phone vibrating with 20 missed calls from my mother. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't a threat. It was freedom. James padded into the room, in Woolsock's hair tousled from sleep, holding his own mug of coffee. You're awake early, he said, sliding onto the window seat beside me. I was just thinking how quiet it is, I murmured, curling my fingers around the warmth of the cup. No unannounced visits, no ambushes, no one rifling through my closet. His smile was small, but knowing. Your mother called yesterday. I let it go to voicemail. I nodded. I'll call back next week, on my terms. And if they push back? I shrugged. Then the conversation ends. I'm not bargaining with them anymore. Boundaries are boundaries. James kissed my temple. I'm proud of you. I leaned into him, marveling at how light my chest felt, how much oxygen the distance had given me. 3 states between us and my parents, it wasn't exile. It was survival. Grandma Rose moved too. Just 10 minutes away into a senior community she adored. That afternoon, she pulled her silver Buick into our driveway cane, tapping on the ground as she climbed our porch steps. We set tea before her at the kitchen table, steam curling upward, her eyes sharp despite her frail body. She slid a folder across the table. It's time, she said simply. Inside were finalized documents. I was now the executor of her estate, the primary beneficiary. My throat tightened. Grandma, you don't have to! She cut me off with a dry laugh. Don't be ridiculous. You were the only one who ever saw them for what they were. This family has a pattern, Helena. Look. She opened a photo album I had never seen, its pages brittle with age. Pictures of my mother as a girl, always standing aside so her sister could take the spotlight. My grandmother, young and weary, her own brother looming in family portraits while she vanished at the edge of the frame. 4 generations of women in this family, she said with surprising bluntness. 4 generations of doormats, until you. Her eyes met mine, bright with pride. You broke it. 2 weeks later, I stood in my new styling studio downtown. The walls smelled of fresh paint, the racks gleamed with carefully curated designs. On the reception counter lay the latest issue of Style Quarterly, opened to a glossy spread. My wedding day look, my after-party dress, my grandmother's earrings, my refusal to yield. The article hailed it as a boundary-setting bride style, and clients were flooding in desperate to work with the woman who had turned personal rebellion into art. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a new booking, an actress known for her boldness wanting my signature touch. I smiled, arranging the magazines into a neat stack. Creating, building, not surrendering. A week later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was my childhood diary, its purple cover faded, the lock broken. Pages filled with my adolescent handwriting, spilled open lists of things Giselle had taken: the purse, the sweater, the necklace that had never come back. Tucked between the pages was a note written in my mother's familiar cursive. Perhaps we should have listened. Not an apology, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement. I placed the diary on a bookshelf in my studio, not hidden, not central. A chapter closed, not erased. On Thanksgiving, our house filled with warmth and laughter. The table stretched long with friends, colleagues, and Grandma Rose seated proudly at the head. Sarah arranged flowers while James carved the turkey, his easy laughter filling the kitchen. My phone buzzed in the study, my parents' number. I froze for half a second, then turned back to the table. "Do you need to get that?" Grandma asked, eyes knowing. "Tomorrow," I said, sliding into my chair. "Today is for joy." We raised our glasses. James toasted to chosen family and hard-earned peace, and I looked around at the people who had chosen me, who supported without manipulation, who loved without theft. For the first time, I felt not just free, but whole. The turkey was carved, the rosemary rolls steaming in baskets, the cranberry sauce gleaming like rubies in the candlelight. Our dining table had never looked so alive. Sarah cracked a joke about James's carving technique. Grandma Rose laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks, and I felt something I hadn't in years: ease. Pure, unguarded ease. The phone in the study rang again. I didn't move. I already knew whose number it was. My parents'. For the second time that day, Grandma caught my glance toward the study and arched a thin, knowing eyebrow. "Do you need to get that, dear?" I shook my head and smiled. "No, tomorrow is soon enough." James raised his glass, his eyes shining with quiet pride. "To chosen family," he said, his voice steady and warm. "To the ones who stand with us when others try to tear us down. To hard-earned peace." We lifted our glasses, the clink ringing like a bell of triumph. I scanned the faces around me, Sarah, who had documented every manipulation when I didn't have the strength. Grandma Rose, who had broken her own silence to hand me the tools I needed. James, who never once asked me to bend when everyone else demanded it. Not one of them loved me for what I could give or take or sacrifice. They loved me for who I was. As laughter rippled around the table, I thought of the diary on my shelf, of my mother's hesitant note. Perhaps we should have listened. Too little, too late. It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest they'd ever come to admitting their guilt. And I realized something: I no longer needed their apology. I didn't need their validation. Their approval had been the leash around my neck all my life. But now I was free. I passed the mashed potatoes, listened to Sarah's story about her latest client disaster, and felt the glow of the fire against my back. I didn't wonder what my parents were saying in their dining room. I didn't ache for their absence. The only thing I felt was gratitude for the family I had chosen, and for the courage that had carried me here. Some things are meant to be shared meals, laughter, love. Some things are worth keeping: dignity, joy, peace. And some things, your self-respect, your voice, your truth, should never be given away. The phone in the study stopped ringing. The silence that followed was rich, golden, absolute. I lifted my glass, higher heart, steady voice clear, to new beginnings, to endings we can live with, to finally saying enough. And as glasses clinked again, I knew this was the closure I had always needed. Tomorrow I might answer their call. Or maybe not. Either way, tonight belonged to me.